However, due to worsening security conditions, the barrack officer unexpectedly interrupts their sleep to inform them that he will send Hook and his companions to Belfast. The unit prepares for deployment without further ado, while Hook suddenly feels anxious. Hook visits his younger brother, Darren, in a local diner before he prepares for deployment. When Darren learns that his brother will be deployed to Belfast for an emergency operation, he suddenly expresses sadness. So, Hook assures Darren not to worry as he will not leave the country and will only serve in another city. Afterward, Hook spends his remaining time playing football with Darren on an open field before dropping him off at their apartment. The following day, the regiment safely makes it to Belfast, where the barracks officer instantly accommodates them. The team settles in their new barracks for the rest of the mission. Eventually, 2nd Lieutenant Armitage shows up and introduces himself as the regiment's platoon leader despite lacking experience. Armitage will be in charge of their unit, regardless of whether or not the members want him to be. After a brief meeting, the regiment rests themselves for the whole night in preparation for the next day's mission. However, Hook seems to be having trouble sleeping, so he leaves their barrack room to get some fresh air. Once outside, Hook joins the smoking activity with Corporal after unexpectedly seeing him sitting upstairs. Hook inquires about the soldiers he encountered, only to learn they are members of the Military Reaction Force, MRF, the British Army's covert counterinsurgency force. And before Hook says anything about them, Corporal already assures him that MRF has nothing to do with their regiment. Later, Hook scribbles notes as the drill instructor educates them about the war-torn territories, including the coexisting communities of Irish Catholics, known as Republicans, and Ulster Protestants, known as Loyalists, who live side by side. Both communities have paramilitary elements eager to take on one another, making the situation much more difficult. Due to a division in the Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA, and Official Irish Republican Army, OIRA, factions, the drill instructor warns them to be cautious inside the Republican movement. He also urges the regiment not to enter perilous flats because they become IRA strongholds in time. Shortly after, the regiment is finally ready to go into battle and receives their weapons. However, Lieutenant Armitage emerges from nowhere and tells them they are merely there to support the Royal Ulster Constabulary, RUC, in the Catholic community. So, they are not allowed to wear any protective gear, and Lieutenant Armitage only provides them berets in exchange for their acknowledgement as troops. Leaving them no choice, Hook and his unit wear the beret and deploy to a volatile area without defensive equipment. Upon arrival, the regiment quickly forms in line as the British police begin their house-to-house inspection for firearms. While the regiment cordon off the houses on both sides, the Catholic civilians suddenly gather to protest. Meanwhile, the British police give the Catholic civilians rough treatment, causing people to get angry as they see their fellow residents hurting. On the other hand, Corporal immediately orders Hook to tell Lieutenant Armitage that they need more men outside as the Catholic civilians become aggressive. Hook rushes inside the house to speak with Lieutenant Armitage, only to discover that he and the other police officers are assaulting an innocent civilian. Unfortunately, the only thing Hook and his regiment can do in response is try to push back the mob to prevent them from attacking. Because of this, Hook ignores what he sees and concentrates on Corporal's instruction to inform Lieutenant Armitage that he needs out there. Meanwhile, Sean calls for Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA, gunman Paul Haggerty to help them turn down the Fenians. While the Catholic civilians are protesting, one of Hook's comrades suddenly fires a gun into the sky, causing people to retreat. Shocked, Hook shouts to his comrades not to shoot, but it is too late. The Catholic civilians get livid and start throwing rocks at them. The sergeant suddenly gets hit by a rock and drops his L1A1 rifle to the ground. On the other hand, a small lad snatches the weapon while the regiment scrambles to get the sergeant to the medic. But Armitage quickly detects it, and orders Hook to follow him so he may return the firearm. Hook chases after the boy as he dashes through the crowd. Some Catholic civilians follow Hook from the back. As for Thompson, he decides to join Hook in his plan of action. Good thing Hook is there to catch the youngster and take the L1A1 easily. However, a group of Catholics swoop in and beat Hook down, including Thompson, who is only a few steps behind them. Meanwhile, the Catholic civilians' protest escalates, causing the regiment and the British police to pull out. Because of that, Hook and Thompson are left behind without noticing it. On the other hand, a sympathetic woman suddenly intervenes in the mob to stop them from beating Hook and Thompson to death. The woman manages to calm things down as the men halt from beating them up. However, the approaching Haggerty suddenly shoots Thompson at point-blank range. He also attempts to kill Hook by signaling Sean to do it. But Sean suddenly hesitates, allowing Hook to flee through the streets before getting killed. Hook spots an outhouse as he runs through the streets and back alleys in an attempt to flee from Haggerty and Sean. Thus, he makes a pact to remain there until the sun sets. Haggerty and Sean catch up with their friends on the other side of town. Sean's father, though, emerges out of nowhere and recognizes his son among them. As a result, he swiftly removes Sean from the situation and tells him not to engage in it. When the sky gets dark, Hook resolves to leave the outhouse and dress like an average person for the sake of survival. After that, he wanders through the Shankill estate, where he comes across a young Protestant rioter. Young males protesting in support of Ulster Protestantism have been identified as loyalists. Alas, Hook is aided by the loyalist boy, who now knows he is a soldier and helps him get back to the barracks. This ultimately leads to his being taken inside the loyalist-controlled neighborhood pub. Once inside, Hook glimpses a loyalist gang, including the child's uncle, working on a bomb in the rear room to kill Fenians. The uncle of a loyalist boy notices Hook seeing them, so he rushes out to meet him and gives his dog tag to Sergeant Lewis. Sergeant Lewis is officially revealed to be a member of the Military Reaction Force, MRF. After receiving the dog tag, Sergeant Lewis immediately talks to Hook until he discovers that Hook is under Lieutenant Armitage's supervision and is currently engaged on a mission. Due to that, Sergeant Lewis assures Hook that he will have a word with Lieutenant Armitage once they get back to the billet. On his way out, Captain Sandy Browning is informed of Hook's presence by Sergeant Lewis. Back at the local pub, the loyalist boy asks to Hook why Sergeant Lewis did not take him now that he leaves the place. Stupefied, Hook immediately goes outside to check on Sergeant Lewis, but no more silhouette of him is found. Just as Hook is about to re-enter the local pub, it spontaneously combusts. One of them inside, a loyalist boy who brought Hook, was killed, and several others got injured due to the tremendous explosion. Hook still takes the loyalist child outside despite knowing he is already dead. After that, Hook calls for assistance in bringing the loyalist child to a medical facility for treatment. While strolling, Hook suddenly collapses and falls to the ground. Because of the shrapnel that splashed out on the explosion, Hook can no longer endure the wound in his belly. Meanwhile, the Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA, member James Quinn and the official IRA member Boyle suddenly accuse each other of the bombing. Technically, it turns out that the loyalist bombers accidentally blew themselves up as the bomb was too heavy to carry. And the two factions are shown to be utterly blind to the case, leading them to blame one another for the incident. On the other hand, two Catholics, Eamon and his daughter Bridget, notice Hook on the ground. Eamon quickly transports Hook to their home in the Divas flat without thinking twice. Once they reach home, Eamon and Bridget suddenly learn that Hook is a soldier. Feared, Bridget suggests to his father to take him to the hospital, but Eamon refuses. Eamon, a former army medic, eventually decides to take care of Hook and begins stitching his wounds. Meanwhile, Captain Browning and Sergeant Lewis are in a heated argument because they fear they will be identified as responsible for the bomb explosion if Hook finds them. It has been shown that Captain Browning was the one to commence the bomb's creation. While arguing, Lieutenant Armitage and Corporal unexpectedly enter the room and ask about Hook. But rather than listening to their responses, Captain Browning only condemns them for their error of leaving Hook behind. Thus, Lieutenant Armitage makes it crystal clear that they only require assistance. Captain Browning, enraged, throws Hook's dog tag at Lieutenant Armitage, revealing his ambiguity about Hook's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Eamon successfully treats Hook's wound and lets him rest for a while. After, Eamon gets in touch with Boyle, the senior officer of the official Irish Republican Army, OIRA. Despite the situation of the Provisional IRA currently taking control of the area from the OIRA, Eamon still takes the risk of getting help from him. Meanwhile, Quinn intends to keep an eye on him as proof that he is the person in charge of bombing the local pub. Quinn is the key leader of the younger Provisional IRA faction. So, when Quinn and his squad see him visiting Eamon's flat, Haggerty discreetly follows him while Quinn calls the rest of the group members to prepare. Eventually, Boyle makes it to Eamon's residence. Eamon believes that Boyle will provide a more humanitarian resolution to Hook's dilemma because he is a more reasonable member of the Provisional IRA than the younger ones. Luckily, Boyle accepts Eamon's assistance and promptly departs his residence in search of a solution. But little do Eamon and Boyle know, Hook accidentally overhears their conversation. As Hook feels endangered, he discreetly takes a large knife he finds in a bag and flees the flat. Meanwhile, Boyle goes to the telephone booth to talk to Captain Browning about Hook. After the call, Captain Browning quickly leaves the barracks to get Hook when suddenly Lieutenant Armitage and his men appear. Surprisingly, Captain Browning allows them to join and save Hook. Still, he warns Lieutenant Armitage that if anything happens to his men, he will be the one to take control of the situation. A while later, Boyle finally meets Captain Browning and reveals Hook's whereabouts. However, before he seals the deal, Boyle tells Captain Browning that he must kill Quinn in return. Without further ado, Captain Browning accepts Boyle's favor and makes a move. Hook attempts to flee the apartment, but Quinn and his gang are already moving upstairs to kill him. Panicking, Hook runs away from Quinn's men and hides. However, he is unable to get away from Haggerty, therefore, he takes his last option to stab Haggerty with a knife. Afterward, Hook escapes from the building, but unfortunately, Quinn's men suddenly capture him. Because of that, they hurriedly take Hook to their hideout. As for Captain Browning and Boyle, they fail to see Hook in Eamon's house. Boyle, presuming that Quinn has already captured Hook, tells Captain Browning that he knows where Hook might be. At the hideout, Quinn aggressively pushes Hook to the ground and orders Sean to murder him. But Sean hesitates to pull the trigger again. Eventually, Captain Browning and Boyle finally arrive at the hideout and begin the shootout. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Armitage decides to support Captain Browning in saving Hook inside the hideout. So, he issues orders for his men to disperse. Sergeant Lewis shoots Sean without hesitation or remorse. After that, he moves on to Hook and chokes him to death. This way, he can prevent Hook from telling the truth about their ploy. However, Sean, who escapes the first shot, kills Lewis in seconds. Seconds afterward, Sean is also struck by another round from Lieutenant Armitage. Despite Quinn's best efforts to elude capture, Captain Browning is able to apprehend the wanted man. But rather than detaining or killing him, Captain Browning explains that Boyle wants to kill him. Captain Browning is found to have made a deal with Quinn to work together and allows him to depart. He also reminds Quinn that he will talk to him soon enough. The movie ends with Hook returning safely to his barracks after the unexpected venture into flats. However, the incident involving Hook, Sergeant Lewis, and Sean suddenly gets dismissed by the commanding officer. It is revealed that Lieutenant Armitage, who made a formal complaint to the commanding officer, fails to acknowledge